Hi everybody, it's Senpai Fanfics back at it with another amazing content. If you guys would like to see more videos like this in the future, hit the subscribe button and notifications on for more videos like this. Thank you to the creator of the fanfic, which will be linked below. Let's start it. Okako, not for the first time, found herself looking down at her left hip with a frown. Her hand ran over the bare skin, as if somehow she just needed to brush off some dirt and what she wanted to see would suddenly appear. But no, just like always, the only marks upon her skin were just some stretch marks. Soul marks were rare. They were already uncommon before Quirks started appearing, but the reported counts of soul marks have decreased sharply in the generation since. It's theorized that only quirkless people can have soul marks, but every now and then there were cases that proved it wrong. Okako never expected Deku to be one of them. She remembered so clearly the day Boku approached her a couple of months after they started dating. First asking if she was serious about dating Deku, and then asking if she knew about his soul mark. Okako thought he was joking at first until she asked Deku about it later that night. He felt embarrassed showing it, but she had to see it. A single black band wrapped around his upper left thigh, so high up that he had to lift the leg of his boxers for her to see it. Deku assured her that regardless of who his soulmate was or where they were, he loved her. Words he kept repeating for nearly 10 years. Despite this, Okako spent every day wondering when that soulmate would appear. She spent all this time wondering if he would even remember her when that day comes. Well, tonight was that night. Do you two remember Melissa's shield? Ida had asked them during their lunch earlier that day. Okako immediately felt her stomach drop when he asked that. It was already odd for their old friend to invite them both out so suddenly and last minute. Had something happened? Of course, Deku answered with furrowed brows, gripping Okako's hand under the table. Is she okay? Oh, yes. Ida told them with a wave of his arm as the couple sighed with relief. I apologize if I made you think otherwise. You can't just ask that with such a serious expression, Okako said as she briefly put her face in her hands before looking back up at Ida. So, how is she doing? I'm assuming this has something to do with Mai? Well, partially yes, Ida said as he set his hand back on the table, a small tap filling the air from his metal ring meeting the wood surface. Okako was almost immediately reminded of their wedding, her standing off to the side during the bouquet toss, only for Mai to have hidden a tracking missile into the flowers that shot straight towards the necklace she had given her. Melissa is going to be in Japan for a few months for work. Mai is working with her on a project. She's going to be off the island for that long? Deku asked with surprise. Must be a big project. I'm assuming you don't know any details? Ida shook his head. More importantly, Mai and I took Melissa on a bit of a sightseeing trip yesterday since it's her first time in Japan. We ended off the night by taking her to her first onsen. Deku seemed confused as to where this was going, but Okako's eyes grew wide as she stared intently at her nervous friend, hoping desperately that he wasn't about to say exactly what she feared. Ida met her gaze before taking a deep breath. Mai said that Melissa has a soul mark on her left hip. The knock on the bathroom door caused Okako to jump as she scrambled to pull her pants back up. Ocha, her boyfriend's concerned voice called out from the other side. Is everything okay? Yes. Okako called back as she flushed the unused toilet and started washing her hands. Sorry, I spaced out. I'll be out in a second. As soon as she opened the door, she was greeted by a frown and furrowed brows. We should reschedule. I can tell her something came up. Okako looked up at him before activating her quirk on herself, floating up so she could cup his face in her hands and kiss him right on the wrinkles forming between his eyebrows, pulling back with a smile as he wrapped his arms around her waist. I'm fine, I promise. Besides, this is her last free day before her work really begins. Who knows when's the next time we'll actually get to see her. Deku held her gaze silently for a moment before pulling her in closer while hiding his face in the crook of her neck. Okay, but if it gets to be too much, don't be afraid to let me know. Squeeze my wrist if you want us to end things early, okay? Okako smiled softly as she ran her fingers through his hair. What did she do to deserve someone as sweet as him? Well, she didn't really deserve him. She simply stole him from Melissa. She's the one he truly belonged with. Okako wrapped her arms and legs around Deku and pulled him in close, enjoying the comforting contact while she still could. The knock at the door made her blood run cold. This was really it. Who? Okako gave Deku one last tight squeeze of a hug before floating back down to the floor, touching her finger pads together. Taking a deep breath, she looked up at her boyfriend with a smile before speeding her way towards the door before he could make yet another argument against the inevitable. She opened the door to an ecstatic Melissa who had barely aged a day, her hair pulled up into a high ponytail and wearing a pink sundress. A specific pink sundress that was all too familiar. Okako froze as she looked at the pale pink fabric with a couple black dots running down the cleavage and the hot pink accents framing her waist. Okako! Melissa exclaimed with excitement as she swooped the smaller woman in for a tight hug, lifting her off the ground in the process. Oh, it's been far too long. You really need to come visit. Ireland has made so much progress in the past decade. Hey Melissa, Deku casually greeted his soulmate. Nice dress. Melissa finally let go of Okako as she stepped back with a giggle, twirling in place as the skirt swirled around her. Mai took me to one of those hero merch shops yesterday and obviously I had to get the official Uraraka sundress. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Wow, it looks so good on you, she complimented the American with a forced smile, receiving a genuine one in return. Melissa really was such a good person, and so gorgeous too. Deku really did deserve her. The two were chatting along easily, catching up. Unlike Okako, the two of them had seen each other a few times since Melissa and Mai collaborated on most of Deku's hero costumes ever since he went pro. As they smiled at each other comfortably with their friendly conversation, Okako found herself flashing back to that same twisted feeling in her gut that she got back when they were kids, before she was even dating Deku and all she had was a simple crush. They really did look good together. Deku draped his arm across Okako's shoulder, giving her an affectionate side hug before leaning down to leave a gentle kiss on her forehead. 10 years. Okako's eyes grew wide along with Melissa's smile. Oh, that's so great. You two really do look good together. Not as good as you two. Mai said that you have a soul mark on your left hip, Okako stated more loudly than she planned as Melissa's hands reflectively pulled down at her dress, as if it was somehow showing despite the hem going halfway down her thighs. Deku has the same one. The silence seemed to press down on her shoulders and wrap itself around her throat. She looked down at the ground again, starting to regret everything. She shouldn't have said that. She definitely shouldn't have said it like that. She shouldn't have even agreed to date Deku after finding out about his soul mark. Okako should have broken up with him all those years ago on that day in his dorm when he first showed it to her. Deku, could you get us some drinks from the family mart? Both of the heroes looked at Melissa with surprise, her eyes meeting Deku's with determination before looking down at Okako with a smile. Deku met Okako's eyes and a silent conversation happened between the two, before he nodded his head, kissed her on the lips, and made his way out of their home. As soon as the door locked, Okako was pulled into yet another hug, but this time it was much tighter and her feet stayed on the ground. Sorry, I just did, Melissa whispered with a trembling voice as her hands gripped into the smaller woman's shirt. Give me a moment. Was she crying? Uncertain what else to do, Okako hugged her back, rubbing slow circles along her back. Melissa was almost 30, so she must be emotional to realize her soulmate had been someone she knew for so many years. Melissa took a deep breath before leaning back, wiping away her tears, and holding on to both of Okako's hands. I am so sorry. I completely misunderstood things and probably unintentionally made things worse for you. Okako furrowed her brow with confusion. Misunderstanding. Well, last night, Mai and I were at the onsen when my soul mark obviously came into discussion, Melissa explained. I said I hadn't found out who my soulmate was yet. She mentioned that Ida knew someone with a soul mark, and when we asked him about it he got pale and mumbled something about things being complicated but that he would talk with them in the morning. Then a few hours ago, Deku randomly invited me over to have dinner with both of you and I just... Melissa's face grew red as she looked off to the side for a moment, her eyes looking like they were grappling for the correct words, before she finally turned back to Okako. I thought. Well, I had assumed that you were my soulmate, Okako. Who? Why would she? Okako found her gaze drifting down to Melissa's dress, suddenly connecting the dots. Melissa got the dress while shopping with Mai yesterday, saying the purchase was an obvious choice. Ida said the onsen was the last place they went to before going their separate ways. She vaguely knew that Ida supposedly knew her soulmate, but didn't get any solid ideas until Deku texted her. The first thing she did when she stepped in was swoop Okako into an affectionate hug and encourage Okako to come to Island. Meanwhile, her conversation with Deku was more casual and the two of them didn't even shake hands. You? Okako wasn't certain, but the embarrassed flush on Melissa's face as she nervously twirled a strain of hair between her fingers only seemed to make her assumption more solid. How long have you had a crush on me? Melissa cleared her throat, stepping back and staring up at the ceiling for a moment before looking down at her feet. Just, you know. You looked so good wearing that dress while kicking Villian ass. Who wouldn't fall for you? Okako was having trouble organizing her thoughts, which seemed fine by Melissa as silence encouraged her to keep talking. Not that I don't like Deku. Melissa added nervously. He's a great guy, as you obviously know. The two of us always got along with no issues right from the beginning, which makes sense in hindsight. She laughed awkwardly as she patted her left hip. But almost every time we talked, he couldn't help but gush about you. He really is hopelessly in love with you, so I was kind of trapped in this weird scenario where the main two people I was attracted to were in a committed relationship with each other and I barely communicated with them, and almost everyone else I actually saw on a consistent basis were my employees, and that's a whole other can of worms. Okako reached up and put both of her hands on Melissa's mouth. All of the dread Okako had been feeling for the past few hours still hadn't left yet, and all of this piling on top was just far too much. But... you... Melissa reached up and gently pulled Okako's hands away from her mouth before holding onto them. Sorry, I didn't mean to make this situation more difficult than it already is. I know everything is so complicated right now with the soul marks. Oh, that wasn't the issue. Well, yes it was, obviously, but that wasn't the most press. Why did she agree to this again? Yes, at first she didn't want to do it because of Deku's soul mark, but at this point they've been together for so long that she wasn't sure if it was even necessary anymore. Especially since it wasn't just the two of them anymore. Deku and I have our soul marks. You too deserve your own mark. Okako took a deep breath, gripping onto her bouquet of red chrysanthemums that complemented her soft pink gown. The gentle music playing was so far away yet pounding in her ears as loudly as her heartbeat. It was almost time. Everything looks fantastic, her dad whispered in her ear as he patted her elbow right where their arms were linked. The two of them locked eyes, Okako biting her lip nervously. He was right, everything did look fantastic. As soon as the possibility of a wedding became a reality, Melissa offered to organize for them for a perfect ceremony on Island. They didn't even have a wedding venue on the island before, so everything was crafted from scratch just for them. Her girlfriend was even crazy enough to import sakura trees 2 years ago to give them enough time to really grow healthily on the island and be in full bloom for the ceremony. A simple outdoor wedding in the spring was all Okako and Deku asked for, but Melissa went above and beyond to make every last detail perfect. But still, Okako's stomach was twisted in knots. You would think that being a pro hero for a decade would make her used to having all eyes on her, but this was different. There was a small audience waiting for her around the corner, but all of them were close friends and family. Most, if not all of them, people who have been waiting for this day that Okako never thought would come. If you want to run, go for it, her dad suddenly added as he squared his shoulders back and puffed out his chest. I'll make sure Izuku doesn't get past me. Okako snorted, completely caught off guard. Really? You're going to hold back the #1 hero in Japan? He smirked at her proudly. For you? Your old man will fight off anyone. She giggled, finally feeling the tension leave her body. There was a time in her life she would have wholeheartedly believed him when he said that, but the years were evident in the wrinkles on his face and the pepper in his hair. It didn't help that his line of work put so much pressure on his joints, some days having to walk around with a cane. Okako rested her head on his shoulder for a moment, being gentle to not mess up all of the hair and makeup Mina had insisted on doing for her. "Thanks, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, Mochi," he told her proudly with a smile, using that silly nickname he gave her as a child because of her big cheeks. As the music began to slow down, he patted her arm. "All right, last chance to run." "Dad, I'm not running," Okako giggled as she straightened back, taking one glance at her dad before taking that first step. She had walked down this path several times over the past couple of years, watching it shift from a mostly empty field to a colorful garden packed to the brim with gorgeous flowers. But it really was different seeing everyone she held dear looking at her with happy smiles as they stood up from those ornate chairs, pink petals drifting in the gentle breeze as Kyoka expertly played on the piano. Then, of course, looking down the aisle to see Deku staring at her with pure adoration. He looked absolutely perfect in that pastel blue suit, worth every last penny, and strange look they got when they told others about their outfits for the wedding. Especially as her gaze drifted to Melissa standing right behind him in a lavender pantsuit, her hair cut into a stylish bob. Because of course after years of effort to craft the perfect wedding, the best option was for Melissa herself to act as their officiant. As her dad handed her off to Deku, he gave the younger man a couple hefty pats in the shoulder before he made his way back to his seat, where her tearful mom was waiting for him. On the other side of the aisle, Inko was already a blubbering mess, Bakugo's parents flanked on either side of her, and doing their best to comfort her. Okako and Deku locked eyes, and for a moment, everything else seemed to melt away. Then in unison, as if they had planned it before, they both looked at Melissa, who beamed right back at both of them. "Welcome family and friends," Melissa started off, looking around the garden. "We are gathered here today to witness and celebrate the marriage of Izuku and Okako, who carry a bond which has persisted for several years despite the more traditional roles fate set before them. We now bear witness to what their relationship has become. Today, they will affirm this bond formally and publicly. Izuku and Okako will mark their transition as a couple not only by celebrating the love between themselves, but by also celebrating the love between all of us, including the love of their parents, siblings, extended family, and best friends," Melissa continued before giving a little flip of her hair. "And myself, of course." Deku and Okako giggled along with some of the crowd. "And to symbolize their love for each other, they will need their rings," Melissa said as she looked into the crowd at the large and bulky redhead. "Oh, it's your time to shine, little buddy," a hero said as he stood up at his towering height while holding onto a 4-year-old boy who would practically be a carbon copy of Bakugo if it wasn't for his black scleras and pink horns. A hero bent over to set little Ryuji standing in the middle of the aisle, turning back just to grab the pillow with rings on it and handing it over to the young boy, who gripped onto it for dear life. Slowly, the small boy stepped forward one careful step at a time while a hero stayed directly behind him to make sure he walked in the right direction. Ryuji, however, decided that he was close enough as before he was even halfway down the aisle, he lifted up the pillow and threw it right at Deku, who luckily acted fast enough to catch it before it hit the floor. "Good arm," Bakugo called out before getting smacked by Mina, the garden filling with laughter as a hero picked up Ryuji with an apologetic smile towards Okako and Deku, who were laughing along with everyone else, and sat back down. "And that's why I loosely sewed the rings to the pillow," Melissa declared with a chuckle before clearing her throat. "Now, Izuku and Okako have decided to write their own vows. Izuku, if you will begin." Deku took a slow breath. "When I first learned what my soul mark meant, I thought that perfect partner would just step in front of me one day, and that would be that. But as we got closer, I knew that I needed you in my life, regardless of what fate had planned for me. Okako, I've been proud of the 11 years I could call myself your boyfriend and the 2 years as your fiancé. I can't wait for all of the years that I will be able to call myself your husband." As her heart swelled at his genuine words, the only thing that kept Okako together was the feeling of his trembling fingers sliding the simple black band over her finger. Deku, darling, please, this makeup has to last me through the ceremony at least, Melissa jokingly said as she fanned her face, fighting off tears, before composed herself and turned towards her girlfriend. Okako, if you would state your vows. She gripped onto Deku's ring in her palm, looking her fiancé in the eyes. I never once doubted you every time you would tell me you loved me, Deku. But for the first 10 years of our relationship, I always found myself scared of a cruel fate where meeting your soulmate would make you forget about me. However, soulmate or not, fate has tied all three of us together, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Okako felt like her heart was about to float off into the sky without her as she slid the black ring onto Deku's finger. It certainly wasn't eye-catching or traditional, but the meaning behind it for them was all that mattered. Melissa sniffled, having officially lost her battle against fighting back the tears, but managed to keep her voice steady. If anyone has any objections, speak now. So I can immediately escort you off of the premises. Laughter rippled through the air. By the authority vested in me by the province of Island, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride. Okako had no idea how electrifying kissing her husband would be. They were both almost double the age as when they first started dating, and yet it felt the same as that first kiss, staring up at the stars from the rooftop of the dorm. She didn't even register all of the sounds of the. Thank you all for watching this video. Check out the maker of the fanfic down below and goodbye.